Thank you for joining us for the July episode of World Kitchen. As I mentioned in the email you got earlier today, my deck garden is going a little crazy. We have so much basil, and the tomatoes are coming in, and the peppers are coming in. So if any of you are growing anything, I'm sure they're all starting to ripen and be ready to pick as well. So if you're anything like me, it's usually kind of a feast or famine. You're kind of like, well, now what do I do with all this that I planted? And it's all ready at one time. So hopefully today's episode will give you some ideas for what to do with some of the things that you've been growing. And I am excited to have a guest chef with me today who is going to talk to us about pesto. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor for World Kitchen, which is the Penn State Office of Outreach and Online Education's Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity Office. They've been sponsoring us for a little over a year now, and we're very appreciative for their sponsorship. And I think that tells you everything I need to tell you. And I'm going to introduce my guest chef, Jessica Pacholski. Jessica, come on over. So Jessica is here to tell us everything you ever wanted to know about pesto, and probably even things you didn't know, because I found out so much about pesto that I didn't know. Typically, I thought pesto was, basil and pine nuts, right, Jessica?
And most people do.
Yeah. So I will let Jessica take it away. As always, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself when things are a little slow, and we will ask Jessica those questions. But she's got a lot to tell us, so let's go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much, Tamara. And thank you again, everyone watching and joining. I am Jessica Pacholski, the founder of Once Upon a Pesto. In 2016, I was working at Rodale, the publishing company for Men's Health, Women's Health, Runner's World, and Bicycling magazines. And that's when this idea of pesto and Once Upon a Pesto began. And from doing my research in olive oil and studying abroad in Italy, I learned that pesto is a process. It comes from an Italian verb that means to crush or to grind. And so the same verb is from which we get the mortar and pesto being what is used to crush and grind pesto. And in the 13th century, that is when we can trace back the history of pesto to when they crushed garlic using a mortar and pestle, using this ancient primitive tool that we now see today as food processor. It's quick, it's easy, it gets the job done, it can do it in larger quantities. But that is kind of what led to all of this that we see today as pesto genovese. Like Tamara said, a lot of us think of basil and pine nuts as pesto, but because in Liguria and northwestern region of Italy, that was an abundant crop. Like a lot of people who grow basil at home, it's abundant in the summertime. It is full of flavor, and you don't want it to go to waste. So what do? They made pesto with it. And pine nuts was also regional specialty there. And so that fit naturally into this idea of making pesto, which was often used in pasta because that is, again, a local traditional staple of the area. But as you travel throughout Italy, you're not going to see pesto genovese in the south. For example, in Sicily, in the town of Trapani, there is pesto trapanese. And because tomatoes grow abundantly, that is the main ingredient in that type of pesto. So already you can see if within the country of Italy, pesto is more than just basil and pine nuts. And then if you travel a little bit east, another region of Italy called Calabria, you're going to see pesto calabrese. And that is mainly made with roasted bell peppers. And so in Italy alone, you have 3 different types of pesto. And so that is kind of the foundation of what Once Upon a Pesto is all about. It is taking an ingredient that is specific to a certain culture or country, and then using that as the main ingredient in a pesto recipe. But it doesn't stop there, because what do you do with the pesto? You want to use it. And so I provide recipes that are traditional to that country or culture that incorporate the pesto, anything from breakfast foods, snacks, lunch, dinner, desserts, you name it. It's a great way to learn about different cultures, different countries, and also about food and food history. And so that's what I'm excited to share with you today. We're going to make 3 different pestos. Just an introduction, if you saw in the information about this session, there is going to be a Swiss chard pesto that's inspired by Switzerland, and then a corn pesto inspired by South Africa. And last but not least, pineapple pesto inspired by Brazil. So if everyone's ready, I think it's time to get started. So we're going to start with the Swiss chard pesto inspired by Switzerland. If anyone knows about Switzerland, it's a beautiful European country. The mountains are amazing there. It's small and it's landlocked. So there's a lot of outside cultural influences. It's Italy, France, Germany, and Austria. And within their cuisine, you can see these different influences. So first, let's start with the Swiss chard. Some fun facts about the Swiss chard is you would think by its name that it originally came from Switzerland, but that is not true. Swiss chard comes from the Mediterranean, and it was a Swiss botanist who determined the scientific name of Swiss chard, that it was then named Swiss chard, because chard itself comes from a word that means artichoke thistle. So you wouldn't say Swiss artichoke thistle. It acquired Swiss because this botanist was from Switzerland. So we're gonna start with the Swiss chard. I'm gonna chop it up. I recommend about 15 to 20 leaves of the Swiss chard. And there's different varieties. So, you know, whether you grow this green type or some red, it's all personal preference. I think the taste can vary slightly. Go ahead and toss that in your food processor or blender. And for all of these today, I'm going to use the food processor because it's quicker and it's easier, saves a little bit of time, and makes a decent quantity versus making it in the mortar and pestle, even though that is the traditional way. Also going to take a 1/3 cup of the walnuts and our 3 garlic cloves, 1 teaspoon of salt, a 1/4 cup each of olive oil and apple cider vinegar. And for any pestos that you make, I highly recommend extra virgin olive oil. You're going to get much better flavor, and it's the good stuff, they say. And last but not least, 1/3 cup, or sorry, 1/2 cup of Gruyere cheese, which is a hard Swiss cheese.
So Jessica, I noticed that when you put your Swiss chard in, it was dry. If you want to wash your Swiss chard, should you dry it before you use it, or does it matter?
I would recommend patting it dry. It doesn't have to be completely dry, but it gets off that excess liquid.
Could someone substitute a different kind of vinegar?
Yeah, you're going to get a different taste out of it. I prefer the apple cider vinegar because that flavor pairs well with the Swiss chard. It brings out certain qualities that, you know, also blend with the garlic as well. But, you know, I advocate for trying and adjusting things to your personal taste preferences. If you have any dietary needs or restrictions, that's the beauty of pesto, is it is so accommodating and customizable to every person.
Great.
So we're gonna power this up and just pulse it, and you can adjust your volume as you see fit with the sound of the blender here. And with the pesto, you're going to get some things that stick on the side. So I recommend blending for 15, 20 seconds, wiping down the sides, and then blending for another 15 or 20. And also don't be afraid that if your blender or food processor blends to a different consistency, some are going to really make it smooth and finer, and that can also be due to the blade. So use what you know best, try some different things, and get the result that you want. So I'm going to blend here again.
So I see you're using a particularly heavy duty blender there, food processor. So your typical food processor could do the job, but maybe just not make it quite as smooth.
Yeah, it's a process of experimentation just as much as it is with the appliances as it is with the ingredients. I think what I have here is the larger canister that comes with the Ninja food processor. And here, what I'm going to show you next is a smaller kind of self-serve blender, often used for smoothies. But this is something that I'm going to use for the corn pesto because the quantity fits. And I also want to show you that it produces a much smoother texture, whereas the Swiss chard in this larger canister, you can see has a little bit more chunkiness to it, some texture there. As I'm dishing this out, I can really smell the combination of the garlic and the Gruyere. So if you're making this on your own, you can agree to that. If you're going to make this, you can anticipate that.
Yeah, it has a really great aroma.
Yes. And this recipe for Swiss chard pesto makes about 2 cups. And going back to, Switzerland and the cuisine of Switzerland, I want to talk about how I use this pesto. And the first dish is in a barley minestrone soup. And so if you know about soups, you've probably tried minestrone. And some fun facts about minestrone is it is an Italian soup, and it comes from a word that means to dish up. So when you travel throughout Italy and you hear about minestrone soup, it's not like pesto, very much like pesto. It's not a specific recipe. People make it with different ingredients because it's all about this combination of ingredients, this process of making this soup, and using quality ingredients, which the Italians are known really well for. The other dish that I like to use my Swiss chard pesto in is a leek galette. And a galette is a puff pastry tart that is common in France. And as I talked about Switzerland being bordered by Italy, France, Germany, and Austria, you see this French influence, and the Swiss chard pesto is used in that leek galette. And leeks, it's a great summertime vegetable recipe if that's something that you include in your garden. It brings out the Swiss culture. And I recommend it. It's a great appetizer or, a Sunday brunch. It can suit both needs. So now I'm going to try the Swiss chard pesto. And if you made it yourself and beat me to this, I can understand. So here we have it on a piece of baguette. It's very fresh. Also, Swiss chard has a unique richness to it that's different than your kale, your spinach, or your collard greens. So if you haven't tried it yet, highly recommend it. It's really, I'm not a dietitian or a nutritionist, but it as with most dark leafy greens, it's great to include in your diet. All right. So in just a minute, I'm going to clean up here and we'll start on the next one.
Go ahead, I'll do the dishes for you while you're getting ready for the next one. Get that?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next up is our corn pesto. And this one's inspired by South Africa. Now, why corn in South Africa? When you know about Africa and you know the importance of corn, it's really important in their economy, in their culture, in a lot of societal, traditions and things like that. And so corn, when it came to Africa, it didn't initially reach South Africa until a couple centuries later than the rest of the continent, but it immediately took hold. People use it in a lot of recipes, and it actually has its own name in South Africa. It's called mealies. So some people know it as maize, you know, in Central and South America, but in South Africa, they call it mealies. And there's a couple dishes that I'm going to talk about later once we make this pesto that also show the importance of corn and this name mealies. So corn is a great summer vegetable staple. You know, we see it a lot in grocery stores starting about now and throughout the rest of the summer. Sweet corn, yellow, white, whatever it be, taking raw corn off of the kernels. You can also use canned corn. If you're using canned corn, I aim for about 2 cups of the canned corn. And again, this is not cooked. I remember growing up, this is the way my sister and I ate corn. And as you're preparing this pesto, you can see how much more work it takes versus eating it straight off of the corn cob. But in this pesto, it's all worth it.
So it doesn't really matter which variety of corn you're using, whether it's a really sweet corn or, you know, just the normal yellow corn.
That's a great question. I think it all kind of goes back to the idea of like the vinegar with the Swiss chard pesto of what taste you're hoping to get out of it. If you want something that's sweeter, depending on how you plan to use it, then opt for that sweeter variety. These 2 corn cobs will make about 2 cups of our fresh corn. I have a few runaways and you will too, but that's okay.
Someone's asking, would frozen corn be okay to use?
Frozen corn, I believe, would be okay. I haven't tried it myself, but if you want to try that out, I think that's a great option, especially, you know, when we go into the winter and we don't have fresh seasonal ingredients at our hand. So if you do use that, I would say thaw it before, otherwise you're going to end up with a corn smoothie. If you thaw it, you're going to get extra liquid too. So drain a little bit of that out and you're going to end up with a similar end result. Okay, so we have our 2 cups of corn and then 1 cup of, I have parsley here. My recipe calls for chervil. They're interchangeable, so whichever one you have available to you. I think they both make a great pesto.
It could not find that in State College this weekend, so.
This will suffice. And then our 2 garlic cloves. And 2 tablespoons of butter. I'm going to toss that in the microwave really quick for about 10 to 15 seconds just to get that softened.
And is that like an unsalted butter or does it matter?
I use unsalted, and that's because I'm adding salt to the recipe as well.
Okay.
We're gonna go for 30 seconds more. And as that is heating, I'm gonna add in our 1/4 teaspoon of salt. If all you have is salted butter, you can cut down on the salt, maybe use 1/8 of a teaspoon instead. So you can see our butter is now melted. That was in the microwave for about a total of 30 to 40 seconds. And toss that over the rest. And that's it for this pesto. 5 ingredients. We have corn, chervil or parsley, garlic, salt, and butter. So you can imagine, you know, eating corn off the cob right now. Now we're going to have it in pesto form. So again, this is the single serve or smoothie option for the Ninja. And I think it works great if you want to end a smoother resulting texture. We're going to blend this up. All right, and here we have our corn pesto inspired by South Africa. You can see much smoother. Pour it in here. And I'll talk a little bit about the going back to South Africa, mealies and their traditional recipes. So the 2 ways that I use this pesto, the first is a sorghum pilaf. And if you're not familiar with sorghum, that's okay. It's a less common grain, but it's an ancient grain. And it was, it originated in Africa. And it's similar to, I would compare it to the shape of couscous, but the texture of barley. It's really hearty. There are some sorghum crops that I've seen driving, you know, around central PA, South Central PA. And when I use it in the sorghum pilaf, I also add some vegetables and then the corn pesto. And it's a really, really great summertime. You know, you can eat it hot, you can eat it cold. It's great to change up your traditional pasta salad and things like that. The other dish is mealies, mealies casserole. And so like I mentioned, mealies is the same word that they use in South Africa for corn. And these mealies, it's kind of like a polenta, but with the corn pesto, it adds that flavor. And then I also add some other vegetables that you can check out on my website and get a taste of what that might look like. So here we have the corn pesto, and let's give it a taste. The butter and the corn is a combination that can't be beat. All right, so we've been to Europe, in Switzerland, we've been to South Africa, in Africa. Now it's time to go a little closer to home, kind of, depending on how you look at it, to Brazil in South America. So give me just a second to change out my ingredients and we'll get started on a pineapple pesto. Okay, so you see a familiar ingredient here. I just want to point out basil, but the main ingredient here is pineapple. And I want to talk a little bit about the history of pineapple. It is said to have originated in the area that is today Brazil. And then it was called anana, kind of like banana, but without the B. And that translates to excellent fruit. So when Christopher Columbus came to the New World, they discovered this fruit, thought it was excellent as well. And they also noted that it had the shape of a pine cone, and they thought the texture was similar to an apple. And so that's where we get pineapple. And today in Brazil, the pineapple is, Brazil is said to be one of the largest producers of pineapple in the world. And so I don't know if you go to your local grocery store and you check out where your pineapple is coming from, does it say Brazil? Let us know. So if we think about the last pesto and corn and how I often, you know, if it's in the winter, I think the idea of a frozen corn is great. I also think canned corn is a great option. And similarly with this recipe, you could probably use canned pineapple, but I think fresh pineapple is best in most cases. Fresh is always going to have a richer flavor and more freshness to it.
So when I was choosing the recipe or the ingredients for today, I literally had to Google how to choose a pineapple because I don't typically buy fresh pineapple. So it basically told me to sniff the end of the pineapple, the bottom, and see how sweet it smelled. And the sweeter smelling ones were supposed to be the riper ones and would be better.
Okay.
So, but I'm seeing some brown spots on that. Is that typical or is that something you would cut out?
Those brown spots look more like bruises because you see they're
Okay.
all along the edge.
Okay.
So it may, you know, in transport, it may have been bumped or beaten or dropped, things like that. I don't think it's anything you have to cut around, but I am going to cut that larger section out.
Okay.
And that's an interesting point you bring up because growing up, I always heard that the way to pick a pineapple is to pull these guys. And if it comes out easily, it's really ripe. So these, I think, you know, everyone has their own little idiosyncrasies of testing. Yeah. And there's different ways, kind of think of knocking on a melon.
Yeah.
How do you judge that tone? You know, if you're not a musician, how do you know what type of knock it's supposed to produce to make the most ripe option? So trial and error, I think, is always the best way to go. But the beauty of that, you know, you don't have to really worry about which one's right, which one's the best, because in pesto, we're combining these flavors and they all work together to produce something that in the end is going to be great. I think the more you worry about, oh my gosh, my pineapple's not ripe enough, or it's overripe, it's okay, because we have the beauty of these other ingredients coming together. So once you have your fresh pineapple cut up, we're going to take 2 cups of that and toss it into, I'm going back to the large canister here for our food processor. And another generous cup here. I'm going to throw a couple on it top just because I love pineapple that much. All right. And we also have our 1 cup of fresh basil, 1/3 cup of shelled Brazil nuts. And yes, they are Brazil nuts, so you can associate them with Brazil, not like the Swiss chard. That one's a little nuanced, if you will. But did you know Brazil nuts are actually seeds and not nuts?
Also not really easy to find.
Yes.
Might have to hunt for those and they're a little pricey.
And they're worth trying. And, you know, this pesto gives you a glimpse to how you can use them in a recipe. Here we have 1 teaspoon of vanilla. 1 teaspoon of fresh lime juice. And last but not least, 1/8 teaspoon of salt. All right, so this one is ready to blend up, and here we go. Again, like the Swiss chard, I'm gonna pause it here. Give it a little wipe down on the sides, and you can too if this is the method that you're using to make your pesto. And blend it here for another 15 or 20 seconds.
One of the guests was asking if you cannot find Brazil nuts, is there an alternative?
Absolutely. I think another nut that would be a great option to switch out with is, I would say, almond. It has kind of a neutral taste in that less of an oily texture. Also, I would think macadamia nuts would be a great pairing here, just knowing their origin, and they have a buttery sweetness that might be neat combined with the pineapple. I haven't tried it, but I would assume that that one would taste great as well. So I'm going to pour our pineapple pesto into here. And this recipe for pineapple pesto makes about 1.5 cups. And talking a little bit more about Brazil, the food and recipes, in Brazil, coffee is another thing that they produce a lot of. So like pineapple, coffee is another huge export there. And one of the recipes that I use my pineapple pesto in is a coffee flan. And pudim is the name, the interchangeable name for flan in South America. And when you combine coffee, pineapple, and this creamy dessert, it's amazing. And the other recipe that I use is citrus braised ribs. And if you're familiar with Brazilian steakhouses, yes, that is something that is common in Brazil. However, they're called churrascaria. And the gauchos, the people who sit around the fire and roast this meat, that is a big tradition you'll see in Brazil. And so let's give this one a taste. Again, this was pineapple, basil, Brazil nuts, vanilla, fresh lime juice, and just a pinch of salt. What I love about this is it has basil, which people most associate with pesto, but fruit. A lot of people don't think of fruit when they think of pesto. And a lot of my recipes, 40 in total on onceuponapesto.com, feature fruit in some sense. So there's vegetable pestos, there's herb pestos, fruit pestos, some that are just spices. And that just shows you the variety and the customizable nature of pesto, that it's all about the process. It's less about the ingredients. And that's where I think using different ingredients, learning about the cultures and the roots of those foods can really open your eyes to try new things. And with my 40 pesto recipes, 3 of which we tried today, we got to travel to 3 different continents, 3 different countries. You can travel the world and really learn about the history, the culture, and also get to try foods that, you know, if you don't have access to Brazil nuts, maybe they're at the grocery store next town over, or maybe you can try a vegetable that you've seen in the store but haven't known how to use it yet. Same with fruit. I have a passion fruit pesto. And then in terms of vegetables that are a little bit less common, I make a rutabaga pesto and an endive pesto. So be sure, if you've enjoyed this, you can check out more on my website and also make those as well.
Okay, well, I don't know about you, but I'm getting kind of excited about trying this, and I'm already thinking, I think we could do some pasta maybe with tonight with that one. I don't know. I'll have to talk to Alex and see what he thinks. But yeah, this looks amazing. I can't wait to try it. And I want to thank everyone for coming today. This was a little bit shorter, but I'm sure you've got plenty to do on this summer Sunday. Please be aware that next week, this video will be up on wpsu.org/worldkitchen. So you can come back to it and watch it again if you missed something or want to try it yourself. Also next week, we will have information up to register for the August 28th World Kitchen. And that will be, we're calling it Take Me to Pemberley, because it will be some foods from England, and it's all based on the foods used in and around Pride and Prejudice. So that's going to be a really interesting World Kitchen as well. And then coming up later on, we're going to Africa, we're going to Bulgaria, and into the winter, we'll have a lot more for you. So please keep an eye on our website on wpsu.org/worldkitchen. And thanks for coming today.
Thank you so much.